Anybody? Me more than anyone right now.
Gracious and our loving Father in heaven, we thank you for this time that we might assemble to study your word. We're thankful for your word because it is our guide and stay in life. But especially thankful for your Son, Jesus Christ, for the salvation and hope for salvation that we have through him. We're mindful of Lena Black. Pray for recovery for her. Rhonda Barnes. Thankful that Carol Tyree is home and recovering. Brothers of this congregation who have special needs and health matter, pray to bless them. And pray for the congregation as a whole. To bless us in our work, bless us as individuals and families in this congregation. We might continue to serve you in a positive manner, but people might see through us truly your Son as we live out our lives day by day. Bless our class this evening. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks, Warren. All right, we'll continue our series on running. My title for the class is Run the Race, and if you want to go ahead and turn to 1 Corinthians 9, that's where we're going to spend most of our time tonight. So I've enjoyed the previous classes so far, all the classes about running, and one thing that I've noticed is that pretty much all the teachers up to this point have had some type of story that involves running a race, some sort of training. And I think that's kind of the beauty of this topic, is that we can all relate to running, right? All these verses that talk about running, we know we can relate to that. So that kind of leads me into my story. If you all can see that, this is the Iron Horse Half Marathon. That's a picture of me, my brother-in-law Drew, and my dad. So this was in Midway, Kentucky. It's 13.1 miles. And let me just start off by saying, if you think this is a story about me bragging, it's not at all. So to run a race of any kind of distance, you need to have some type of training, right? You can't just roll out of bed and just start running 13 miles. You need to build up your body. You need to have a training regimen to kind of build up your body to run these types of distances. So Drew was the mastermind behind this plan, and so he came up with a training schedule for us. And it was pretty simple. During the work week, we would run on our own. And then on Saturdays, we would all get together, all three of us, and do our long distance run. And looking back, I'd probably guess this is where I went wrong. My training during the work week. See, I'm always trying to take the easy road. I just ran right around my neighborhood, my house. It's pretty flat, easy running, no hills, nothing big like that. Just an easy, smooth path. My dad, on the other hand, if you'd ever been to his house when he lived out on Lake Wilgreen, there's some big hills leading up to his house. So he'd get up every morning and run these hills. He even nicknamed one of them the Widowmaker, because it's a doozy. So he was building himself up. They're laughing. They know about it because they live there now, and when it snows, I mean, you can't even get up these hills sometimes. But anyways, that's what he did for his training. So he was building himself up to run these hills. But, you know, the training was going good for me. We did some races leading up to the half marathon. A lot of the races in Lexington, and maybe some in 5Ks in Richmond, and those are all pretty flat too. So I was speeding by these guys. I was coming ahead of Drew, and my dad was way in the back. I'm not even concerned about him. But this all leads up to the half marathon in Midway. And if you've ever been to Midway, well, it turns out Midway is a hilly place. The course was through these horse farms in Midway. And so when we got going, I knew pretty soon that I was in trouble. Up and down these hills from the time that said go. And I was struggling. Halfway, I was already thinking, oh, I can't wait to quit. And I'd look back every once in a while. My dad was right there on my heels. I knew something was wrong. So I finally got to a point where I just had to stop. I had to stop and walk. And I'll never forget, my dad, who was behind me, he just passed me on by, and he looked back at me. He knew something was up if I had to stop. And he looked back at me about the time I thought, oh, look, he's going to stop and wait for me and make sure I was okay. Nope, he turned back around and took off. And that's the last time I saw my dad until the finish line. So my dad, 30 years older than me, beat me in this half marathon race. Never been able to live it down. I don't think I ever will. So that's well, I do have to say, there is a silver lining. I smoked Drew. He had the same issues that I did, so I beat Drew. I can always lean on that, I guess. But I think this story is a good way to lead up to this class about running the race and the training that is required to run a good race. So if someone could turn with me with 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 24 through 27. If anybody gets there, would you help me out and read that for us?
Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Therefore, I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air, but I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified.
Thanks, John. I think it's kind of funny when Mike was sending out these topics for everyone to teach from, I jumped on this one quick. I picked this one up before anybody even had a chance, and the reason why I said, ooh, I get 3 verses. Everyone else just gets 1. And I'm just impressed by Ken last week. He taught a whole class on 1 verse, and he did a great job. But I'm taking the 3 verses, Ken. So I'm going to examine this passage since we have so many verses tonight, and we're just going to take it apart, read it one by one. So verse 24, Ron just read, do you not know those who run in a race all run? And I think it's interesting that Paul was always trying to address his group. He was trying to, tailor his message to the people that he was speaking with. And Corinth it was located on the Isthmus of Corinth, and that separated the northern and southern Greece. Is a body of land that connected the two northern and southern Greece. And so this was a big deal. The Isthmian Games, Corinth played a host to that. And this was a big deal for these people. They were proud of these games. They knew all about it. They had chariot races, foot races, wrestling, boxing, similar to the Olympics in ancient Greece. So these people knew what Paul was talking about. And we do too, right? We know about these athletic events. We know what it means to compete and run a race. So verse 24 continues, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? So this is probably the most captain obvious statement that I have in my slides here, but there are winners and losers in races. That's obvious. But we can extrapolate that into our spiritual race. I think this is a warning from Paul that not everyone that will run is going to win this spiritual race. But I think we can be thankful that unlike a race, a foot race, there's going to be more than one winner. This prize is open for more than just one. So verse 24 continues, run in such a way that you may obtain it. It, of course, is the prize. So I have on there a question. Aren't we saved by grace? Correct. So I think some think, yes, I'm saved by grace. I can run any way I want. But that's not the case here. And Paul implies here that there is a proper way to run and an improper way to run. So either way, either way you're going to run, it's going to be a significant component of either winning or losing that race. Yes?
Do you think that maybe this is your story about your training, weekday training, in contrast to John's weekday training? Because almost seems like it applies to this right here. John ran more in a way to train to win, which I would correct John. You did it, but it really wasn't with the same vigor, if you will, the same urgency to win as maybe your dad did.
I like it. Nobody else can talk about that race the rest of the class. That was the last comment. Thanks, Ron, for bringing it back up.
But, along those lines, is what you're saying our spiritual race is like that? Are you saying that there are millions of people out there running a spiritual race? Are they running properly? Not everybody runs properly? Is that what I'm to take from that?
Yeah, I think so. I think,
And then how do you determine who's running properly and who's not?
well, hopefully we'll answer these questions tonight. But I think you're right on. So Paul, I think, is implying here that they're... So this is, he's going to compare and contrast the rest of this passage about the physical foot race and the spiritual race. And I think everything he says about the physical race can be applied to the spiritual race. That's what he's doing here. So they're run in such a way to obtain the prize. So that implies that there's a way to run that you won't obtain the prize. Moving on to verse 25. And everyone who competes is temperate in all things. Temperate, that's not a word that I use very often. The only time I use temperate, I think, is to describe a climate or something, but not a characteristic of a person. But I looked it up. Temperate is disciplined, self-controlled. And I think it's interesting here to compare this to an athletic event. So in athletic events, whether it's running, swimming, boxing, racing, whatever you want to do, winning today requires practicing yesterday and the day before and the day before and so on. Really, the race, the boxing match, the basketball game, that's just the test. It's testing to see if you've trained properly up to that point. So how does the race being the test, how does that correlate to our spiritual race? Right?
Two different prizes. One's heaven, one's a trophy.
So how do we get me to a place where I can apply that to being temperate in all things? I need to become self-disciplined, self-controlled.
You heard the term muscle memory. If you do something over and over again, after a while, it's just going to be secondhand.
Right.
Your muscles have done it so much, they know what's coming next or what not to do, what to do. And as Christians, if we prepare ourselves to keep something, then it should be just like muscle memory, that we don't have to think about it, we know what it is, and we're prepared so much when there's an opportunity.
So preparation, I hear. So I have on that last bullet point, so the test for a runner is the half marathon, the marathon. That's when you got to put your training into practice. That's when the test is going to be had for those people. So our test is our challenges in life. How we respond to life's challenges really depends on how we've prepared ourselves before that challenge even presents itself. So how do we gain this discipline? How do we gain this being temperate in our spiritual walk? What are the ways that we gain this discipline? Study. What are some other ways that we can gain self-control? Prayer. Bruce? Paying attention to what you're doing? I actually have that on my list. We're going to fail in some of our races. We're going to lose a race or two. And we need to learn from those mistakes. And we'll gain self-control, discipline from learning from our mistakes. Anything else? I have watching others. That's a way to gain discipline in our lives. And that applies to athletes too. you'll see the top athletes, they're always watching the other competitors. What are they doing? How can I get an edge on them? What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? We can learn a lot from just looking at each other and talking with each other and learning how did you become temperate? How did you become disciplined in your spiritual walk?
That's a really good point. I think it may be that the root of discipline is disciple. And so that kind of goes along with this idea that one of the ways that you would develop discipline is in fact discipling to these others that you're looking at. That's a good example.
Good. So moving on to verse 25. Now they, being the physical foot racers, the runners, now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. I got a picture here of a perishable crown. This is what you would have seen some of the Corinthians. This is what they would have received if they were the top in their race, the top in their class, the winner. This is let's see, what is this? What was this made out of? Olive tree branches and leaves were interlocked to form a wreath, and this was worn as a crown. When you wore this around, you knew this guy was big stuff. He was a victor. So these crowns, they were truly perishable in the sense of the word. You would see these things perish right before your eyes. I think of the trophies that we win and some of these medals that we were wearing in that race in the picture and some of these T-ball and Little League trophies. Those things are going to outlive us. They're just all made of plastic. But they're perishable too. That one day they will perish just like this wreath here. But again, Paul is comparing and contrasting this physical race to the spiritual race. And I think we can apply this perishable crown to other things in our lives. I think in this life we spend a lot of time running worldly races that are in pursuit of perishable crowns. I mean, we're physical people. We're carnal. We're attracted to these perishable physical crowns. So I have a question up here. What are some of these races that we are running where only perishable crowns can be obtained? Jobs? Power in our jobs, money? What else? What are some of the worldly races that we find ourselves a lot of times running? Okay.
I know you're seeing it, I'm past it. But you're seeing it. You're going to see it more and more as they go to school.
Good. Right. What else are these perishable crowns that we're in pursuit of? I think Dwight had it. Money, power. Go ahead.
And things like that.
Yeah. Power, status in the community, possessions.
I think a lot of people spend a lot of time and energy trying to win the favor of others, which goes nowhere. I mean, that's not what we're really.
Favor in the sight of men.
Yeah.
Good. So we'll continue with this verse. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. And I got there that second bullet point. This was coming right from Mike's summary of this particular class. This is how he described it. A race has a beginning and an end. We must run all the way to the end to achieve our crown. And it's funny, when I first read that, I immediately thought of another running story that I have, and it's of my son, Grant. When he was, I think, about 3, we decided we should enter him into a fastest kid in town race. And I think I was the expert on that decision because I'd been chasing him all his life at that point, and he's pretty fast. So we entered him into this race. It was in downtown Lexington. I think it was probably before one of their 5Ks or one of the Midsummer Night's Run, I think. So they had the downtown Lexington already closed off, and they had this kind of a pre-event for the race. And so Grant was pumped. He was ready. He was ready to rock and roll until he got to the race and saw all the people that were there. And so there was tons of parents and kids, and they had different age groups, and it was pretty intimidating for him. But I wanted to win. I'm pretty competitive. So I was thinking, kind of like what you're saying here, I was wanting to win. So I had the idea, so I'll be with him on the start line, and Keely, my wife, will wait for him at the finish line because he'll really want to run to his mom way faster than he'll run to me, I'm sure. So the problem was everybody else at the place had the exact same idea. There was a bunch of parents at the start line and a bunch of parents at the finish line. So we got there. We finally convinced him to just go ahead and do it. On your mark, get set, go. And he takes off. He's going to get to his mommy and fast. And so he's running hard. He looks like he's in the lead. And then he just stops. He stops right in the middle of the race, turns around, and runs right back to me, crying. And when I get him settled down, Grant, why didn't you finish? Why didn't you run to Mommy? And say, I didn't see her. I couldn't find her. There was a big crowd of people, and he just lost sight of her. He took his eye off the prize. His prize was his Mommy, and he couldn't find her. It's kind of funny now. If you see him tonight, he has glasses. Maybe he just couldn't see that far. But he took his eye off the prize, and I think we do that sometimes too. So verse 26, therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. So Paul does not run with uncertainty, so that means we need to run with certainty, right? So I got something, I stole this from Eddie Lawrence. Eddie Lawrence taught an awesome class on grace. And so I took this from him. I drew it up myself. It probably didn't look near as good as what his did. But I think this is an example, and sometimes we're like this. This is how we run with uncertainty. There's this line, this fine line that divides us from being unsaved and saved. And this is our path. This is our race. We mess up. Oh no, we're unsaved. We do something good. Oh, we're back on the saved line. And we're back and forth, back and forth. Isn't this running with uncertainty? This is being uncertain in your salvation. And I think many young or new Christians, and even us sometimes, just think that there's a fine edge separating us from being saved and lost. So what's the alternative? This is running with certainty. This is that same exact path, but the lines have opened up. And unsaved's way over here, unsaved's way over here, and all this is in saved. And what increases those lines? What broadens those lines out? What is it? Grace, yeah. Just like this is Eddie's class on grace. This is grace that separates these lines out. And we might lose our path. We might get lost. We might take the wrong road here and there. We might take the wrong turn on our race. But as long as we've been baptized and we keep the faith, we ask for repentance when we mess up, we're still good. We're still way within these lines. Grace saves us. And we might get lost on our way, but we're running with certainty. The knowledge that we are saved people will help us to continue to run, keep running, and run with certainty. So verse 26, this goes along with, thus I run not with uncertainty, thus I fight not as one who beats the air. I think this is similar to running with uncertainty. Running aimlessly, beating the air. There's no purpose. That means there's no results. I'm going to read this. As I was studying for this lesson, I came across, I think it was a pretty good quote that sums up this running with uncertainty, beating the air. And I'm just going to read it here. Many people run aimlessly in this life. They blindly climb a ladder, not having determined whether it is perched against the right wall. They don't know whether they are coming or going, but seem determined to set a speed record getting there. or they simply go through the daily cycle of working, eating, and sleeping with no apparent purpose except survival. Isn't that sad? There's so many among us that run the race like this. I think we all know someone that's running the race aimlessly. They're beating at air. They have no purpose. And I think we ourselves probably feel like this from time to time. We got a bad week at work. Things are going wrong. We're having financial troubles. Sometimes we feel like this before, but what's the difference between us and the people on the outside of salvation? Right. Thankfully, we have Jesus, and we have each other and classes like this that help us when we're feeling down to set our sights back on the goal. We lose sight of the prize, but we come around Christian brethren and we get our eyes set back onto the prize, and we're no longer running aimlessly. We're no longer beating at the air. People outside of salvation, I don't know what they turn to. They don't have Jesus. They don't have salvation. Go ahead.
It's probably worth observing that when we consider the idea of discipline in Christianity, most of our minds go to the discipline of not sinning. And that's appropriate and true. But it takes an equal amount of discipline to keep our eyes focused on the love and the grace of our God. A lot of people don't have that discipline, and so they find themselves in this jumping back and forth existence. It takes discipline to remember and to have faith in the love and the grace of God.
Excellent. Anybody else? So verse 27, Paul continues, "But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection." So again, he's comparing a runner. What does a runner have to do? He has to train. He has to bring his body into subjection. Our bodies don't want to run. Our bodies want to sit down, not exert energy. But we have to bring it into subjection, force our bodies to run, not be lazy. We must do the same in our spiritual race. Our physical bodies and our spiritual bodies are constantly at odds. What controls us is what the question I have here. Our physical desires or our spiritual desires? So just as the runner must control his body, we must control our bodies. In order to run the spiritual race properly, we must be able to control the physical side of us. So I discipline my body, he continues, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. This verse, I struggled with this when I first read it and a few times when I read it. This is Paul saying this. I discipline my body lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. What was Paul concerned about being disqualified from? Go ahead.
Paul had weaknesses. We all do. And he recognized the fact that if he was going to stand up and talk to people about God's message, when he himself was violating it, that would make him very ineffective. He was still an apostle, but he recognized that that term actions speak louder than words. He was very conscious of that.
Good. Well, Dwight got it on the first time, so everybody give Dwight a hand. But it took me a little while, Dwight. So at my first reading, I thought Paul was concerned about losing his salvation. That's kind of how it reads, right? I myself should become disqualified. We've been talking about obtaining the prize all the way up until this point. And he's disqualified from obtaining this prize. And how ironic would it be for Paul, this great preacher, to preach how everyone else should run the race, and he doesn't run it properly, and he misses out on the prize. And finally, I came to Dwight's conclusion that couldn't be the case, because and really we had just read about it in the previous verses. Paul did not run with uncertainty. He didn't fight as a boxer who beats at the air. Paul was sure in his salvation. So what was he concerned about being disqualified from? And just like Dwight was saying, I think Paul was worried about losing his credibility to teach and to preach. He was worried that if he had a moment where he didn't practice what he preached, he would lose the ability or the influence to reach people who were lost. And what a great attitude. Not only did Paul want to win the race himself, what did he want to do? Yeah, he wants to bring as many people along the race with him. And talk about running with certainty. He's not worried about himself anymore. He's sure in his salvation. I want to take you and you and you and show you how to run this race with me. And together, we'll run it better. You'll give me strength. I'll give you strength. And really, the more people, going back to I said I wouldn't go back to the half marathon, but I guess I will. I'll have to. I never would have ran that thing by myself. No way. I never would have gone through all that training, all that effort by myself. I needed those people running along there with me. I needed my dad. I needed Drew to push me when I didn't want to continue and keep me down that path.
A little bitty phrase that we've all heard basically all of our lives, and that's walking the talk. And so I think that's what he was saying here. You know, you talk, and if you can't walk that, whatever you're saying yourself, then I think that's where the separation comes.
Right. Don't talk the talk, you can't walk the walk. It's good. Anybody else?
I do think he was worried about his own salvation. Those who teach, and I don't know how many people have gone to a classroom, and you say, those who teach can't do. They end up teaching, or they teach one thing and not know others. There's been lots of preachers, lots of famous preachers who've fallen at the peak of their preaching, because it becomes external. It's something I tell you to do, not something I hold myself to.
That's good.
And I think his worry and his whole discussion through this is keep yourselves from sin. Don't think that you've got salvation wrapped up. He's saying you have to act in accordance. You have been saved, like the Israelites walked across the sea, the desert. God says, now that you've done that, I've got some rules for you to live by. Not, I'm going to save you by these rules. I've already saved you. Now you have to, here's some things I want you to do to maintain that. I think he was worried about maintaining it, and in all of his preaching and teaching, you can get lost in that you hold other people accountable, but you don't hold yourself. How many coaches do we find are holding their kids accountable for certain things, but not themselves? I think there's a danger in that, especially if you're a teacher or a preacher.
That's a good point.
I looked at that almost in between the two interpretations that we've already discussed. I don't think he's worried about his salvation. I think he's fully convinced of the grace of God. But he's making the observation in my mind in this verse that it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how much training you've undergone. If you fail to maintain that discipline to the end of the race, even for Paul, that's disqualified. And so I don't think he's worried about it. I think he's just making the observation that, hey, you've got to discipline your body or else even I be disqualified.
That's good. That's a sobering thought that even Paul could get off course and lose the race. So, hey, I I think I see both sides of that. I think that's 100% correct. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Timothy, in the letter that he wrote to him, that he had fought the good fight, finished the course, and kept the faith. So he did see it as a fight. It's something that we have to continue to work toward.
Yeah, you never win the fight as long as you're on this earth. You're never done running that race, done fighting. So that's a good thought too. We're never done with our race.
Somebody asked him one time late in his career what he attributed to his success. And he said, I always got back up when I was knocked down. He's admitting that he was going to get knocked down, but he didn't let that stop him. He got back up and kept going.
Good.
You do get knocked down. You're going to get knocked down on a daily basis if you let those do it. But that's where grace steps in and says, no, wait a minute. It tries back on me. I haven't forgotten you. I'm back home. And that's where grace steps in. Yes, Paul was, I think, concerned that he could lose his salvation. He knew he was going to. But he knew how narrow that road is. As it say, rise the way. That's a narrow road, and he knew that he could very easily go outside that road. And his name could be turned by all, oh, you're Paul. Because he goes to the point of even saying, at another point, that I did not baptize any of you. I'm glad I didn't. Say maybe this one, this one. You can't say that. I don't know, let it go to my head. And he knew that he could very easily step out. Same I could very easily step out.
All right. No.
I think that's what he was trying to say. Even I can step out. And Paul used himself as an example all through all of his writing. I can step out and not come back. I don't want to do that. I'm going to keep working this so that I know.
Yeah, Paul knew better than anybody that none of us was going to run the perfect race. So running to win. We've talked about the training. We've talked about the race. Let's talk about winning. What does it take? So all these verses kind of can be summarized by these 4 words here. So verse 24, I think, can be summarized by determination. That's what it takes to win. Run in such a way that you may obtain the prize. Be determined to finish, not just run, but to finish the race and to win the race. You've got to be determined, determination. We've talked a lot about discipline. Those who compete for the prize are all temperate. We must be disciplined and learn self-control to win the race. Verse 26 talked a lot about direction. Don't run with uncertainty. Don't fight as one who beats the air. We must keep a clear focus, have a clear direction to win the race. And finally, verse 27 can be summarized with denial. Denial is what it takes to win the race. We've got to bring our bodies into subjection. Put off the old man and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. So we got a few minutes here. I got 4 verses that'll kind of hammer home these 4 words: determination, discipline, direction, and denial. So I picked 4 words that kind of either helps us to be like these words or to give us strength as we try to obtain that prize. So someone please turn to Colossians chapter 3, verse 17. Dwight, you got that one?
Do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God, the Father, through him.
That's determination, right? Everything you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus. That's a determined person if we can say that about ourselves. Oh, sorry about that. So discipline. Could someone get 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13?
Has overtaken you except such as is common to man. For God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will also make a way to escape, that you then you're able to prepare.
Good. As we work on being disciplined, being self-controlled, being temperate, this is a verse that can give us confidence to be that way. God is faithful. He will not tempt us beyond what we're able. That should help us as we strive to be disciplined Christians. A verse on direction. Somebody please turn to Proverbs 3, 5 through 6, or just read it right off the screen.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths.
If we ever get off on the wrong path, trust God. Trust the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on what will get us off path. The verse tells us right there. What gets us off kilter, running aimlessly? Right, so when we depend too much on ourselves, that's the one way for sure to get off course. Finally, denial. Matthew 16:24.
Disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me.
That sums up the denial that Jesus requires from us. And I think to sum up this class, I looked at the class schedule and I couldn't believe that nobody had this as a topic. We're talking about running the race, all these verses on running. And this has to be my favorite. So I'll read this one and we'll close on this note. As we try to go about running the race, obtaining that prize, we practice all these characteristics and traits that we've just talked about. This is what we get. This is the end game here. 2 Timothy 4, 7 through 8. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day. And not to me only, but also to all those who have loved His appearing. I think that's a good way to end the class. Thank you all for your attention.
Hello, everybody. We're going to be singing from the books tonight. If you want to mark the song of invitation, that'll be 383. 383, that'll be the song of invitation. But right now, let's sing 450, Give Me the Bible. 450. Give me the Bible, star of gladness gleaming, to cheer the wanderer, lone and tempest tossed. No storm can hide that radiance peaceful beaming, since Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Give me the Bible, holy message shining, thy light shall guide me.
First, I apologize for being in my Godfather voice tonight. I'm glad I'm not leading singing. So it doesn't hurt if you all can tolerate to listen to me. Mark 10, 35 through 45, we find James and John, sons of Zebedee, coming and asking Jesus, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." He said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And then they began to talk about, well, that's pretty awesome. A magic genie, let me rub it here and see what happens. And I don't know what was going through their mind, but they went for it. Pretty brave. And here they go. They said, "We want to sit on the right hand." I guess if the other one said, "I got the right," the other one goes, "I got the left." And they wanted to be able to be there with him in glory. What they didn't realize was that Jesus explained to them on verse 39, that he explained to them that you're going to indeed drink this cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I was. But to sit on my right hand and on my left hand, it's for those whom are prepared. Then Jesus began to explain to them to humble themselves. And then the one I love is, of course, verse 43, "Yet so it should be among you. Whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever desires to be first shall be slave of all." Verse 45, "For the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many." You know, it's really different. And I spent a weekend in a leadership camp. And one of the topics that came up was servant leadership. And only second to the church are organizations like the Scouts and organizations like that you see giving hours upon hours. And I think in the Boy Scouts last year, typically on a year, we'll put in somewhere around 350 to 400 plus hours of community service as a whole. Just on Monday night alone, I don't know if you all noticed, but the parking lot, the weeds down by there, the boys put in over 90 hours of service work around here. And I don't say that to brag. I say that you all probably would never know, as I was talking to Robin Wright, unless it was pointed out to you. Yeah, they do that for things such as rank, but what you're trying to instill in people are things along the line of servant leadership. And I know when Jesus introduced that here to James and John, that had to throw them back, because they're probably thinking leadership like we do today, of management, being number one, being high up there in a place. I don't know if y'all know what the American Sign Language is for management, but it's like a horse, and you're driving a horse with rein. Now, I'm not very good with a horse, Joe Koger, but I did ride as a kid. I rode a lot. I've been thrown a lot, and I still have a floating rib to prove it. But when I did that, I know that as long as I had those reins in my hand, I had control of that animal. So American Sign Language for management is that right there. Do you know what it is for leadership? Anybody know what it is for leadership? I'm betting somebody would know it. Hold your hand up if you know it and show it to me. If you know it, maybe it's this, if I've got it right. Leadership is this. And that is simply leading someone else. The term servant that's used in the Greek is a lot like a table waiter, from what I can read, or a position of great humility, not one of greatness. And that's why Jesus explained to them that if you've come here and want to be great, then you need to learn how to be a servant first. Leaders make heart connections. Leaders learn to lead themselves first. But most importantly, leaders won't be demanding while the others are working, but he'll be there working with them. And that's the beauty of the church. And we see it all the time. And why do we do that? Well, the greatest example that we could have of being a servant leader was Jesus himself, who washed the disciples' feet, and many, many more examples. With that, I encourage you this week to reflect on being a servant leader, and maybe think about passing that along to someone else. Tonight, mentioning the greatest servant leader that we had, Jesus extended an invitation that continues to be extended today. Whether you need to become a Christian and put Christ on in baptism, or whether you need the prayers of the church, we would ask that you come as we stand and sing.
Jesus, keep